This week on Three Questions with Corey Kareem.
Being laid off and coming back to Toronto, it forced me to think of what is your purpose? What are you actually, what are you passionate about? Because sometimes we could be going so fast and going on this track where we're living a life of what other people would want us to live. And you don't have to be the exact carbon copy same person every season of your life. Some failures, some traumatic things, some disappointments will teach you to be a different person. I think they're missing the point. They don't have a problem with attendance.
Now, before we get started with this beautiful conversation, please help a brother out and click on that follow button on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Enjoy the conversation.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Three Questions with Corey Kareem, the podcast show where we sit down with some amazing people who are doing some amazing things. And that's right, you guessed it. We ask them 3 questions, sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7. I know. I read the comments. But rather than just talk about my guests, their wins, and their successes, we tend to start the conversation around their failures, more specifically, the lessons that they learn from those individual experiences. So with that being said, my guest today is a trailblazer, a changemaker, and a powerhouse in the world of sports media. She also is an award-winning entrepreneur, communications and media leader, and a part-time professor with nearly 20 years of experience shaping narratives and amplifying voices. My guest today is also the founder of Shes4Sports Media, which is a company that's on a mission to celebrate and elevate women in sports by creating game-changing digital content, events, and campaigns that champion gender equity. With her career spanning top-tier organizations like CBC, PwC, BMO, and the University of Toronto, she's here to drop some wisdom, y'all, challenge the status quo, and inspire the next generation of leaders in sports and media. So, without further ado, Ainka Jess, welcome to the podcast.
What a warm welcome. Like, really got the morning started here.
Absolutely. Well, you can thank the tea that I've been drinking. That's giving me a little pep in my step.
You mentioned that.
So, Ainka, I know I gave you quite a bit of an intro there, but for my listeners, for my audience that are just being introduced to you for the first time, is there anything you'd like to add to what I just shared about you and your life and your achievements so far?
It was a great intro. I'll give you that. You did kind of puff me up a bit. But I would just say, in general, I'm a curious person. I'm curious about women's stories, curious about women in sports stories. And the women that I've met over the last 9 years are just incredible. They're athletes, but they're also doing stuff off the court. And that's where I get my excitement, when I get to kind of meet the whole person and hear their journey. But, if anyone's wondering, how do you start a business? How did you do this? You got to be passionate, but you got to be curious as well.
Absolutely. I love that. Got to be curious. I think Steve Jobs said something about be curious and foolish at one of his commencement speeches not too long ago, or maybe it was a long time ago. But anyways, so as I mentioned in the intro, I like to start my conversations around failure. I know some people don't like to use that word, mistakes, setbacks, however you want to phrase that. So with that in mind, looking back at your life or career, is there a specific obstacle that were at that time shaped who you are today? And it seemed impossible at the time.
Yes, and it has a lot to do with the origins of how Shes4Sports got started. In 2016, I was in a job, in a role, and it just wasn't working out. The environment wasn't the right environment for me. There were also some administrative issues going on with the leader of the team, and it was clearly, it just wasn't the place I should be working at. And there were a lot of things beyond my control. So to make a long story short, it was a blessing in disguise. The job ended because the department sort of folded. And it was about 6 months. And it was like, okay, that's not how I thought this was going to go. But it definitely was a blessing in disguise. And sometimes redirection isn't that things are, completely over and you're going to just fall flat on your face. Redirection and failure can be pushing you right towards your purpose. So after that 6 months sort of ended, I had to leave where I was living, which was I took a job outside of Toronto. So I wasn't where I originally was from. So I had to move back to Toronto, had to do the humble walk and move back into my mom's place because I had given up my own apartment in Toronto at the time. And if anyone knows about apartment hunting or trying to find somewhere to live in Toronto, they understand my pain.
Quite difficult.
It wasn't that I could just come back and get that same apartment that I had given up. So there was a lot of transitions going on. I had to come back, move back at my mom's. But at that point, I also started looking at myself saying, you know, you've got this many years in communications and media. You also are a big sports fan and love to support women's sports. And also I watch other sports too. What can you do about it? So the questions of the curiosity, what can you do about it? And again, to make a long story short, I started Shes4Sports in that transition. And I don't think I would have started it if I wasn't laid off. And I felt like a failure because you're thinking you've given up so much to move somewhere to take on a job. And then, you're thinking this is not how it was supposed to go. But after I came back to Toronto, the failure turned into a blessing.
I love that. So there's a couple of things that your story triggered some positive thoughts. The first thing that came to mind, or first thought, is identity. And I bring up the word identity because sometimes when you're doing a job that you love or an opportunity that you thought was going to be it for you, and you lose that opportunity or it changes drastically, some of us, including myself in the past, there's like this questioning of identity because you are so closely linked to that. So during that kind of challenging period, did you ever go through that mentally? Was there like an identity situation for you?
There was, because I was on this track of senior communications. At that time I was leading a team of 2 people in a very sort of high profile role.
Right.
I was working for the government in Ottawa. And I thought that was my track. And then being laid off and coming back to Toronto, it forced me to think of what is your purpose? What are you actually, what are you passionate about? Because sometimes we could be going so fast and going on this track where we're living a life of what other people would want us to live, if that makes any sense.
100%.
And it's not always deeply rooted in what we want. And I having the time off to think, what do you want to do next? What are you excited about? Where are the gaps? And that's really how Shes4Sports came up to be. I started calling friends like myself who go to Blue Jays games, Raptors games, friends who work in sports. And I'm like, hey, like, what are your thoughts on, being a women's sports fan? Where do you go to watch stuff? And, how do you consume content? And we just got in this long conversation, and I got to understand different experiences by the people around me who identified as women and their sports relationship. And a lot of them were like, well, there's nothing on TV. There's nothing on socials that highlight the women that are there. We don't even know who's in Canada who's in sports. It would be great to have a community together. And also just some of the other stories of going to watch a football game or Raptors game, and they're like, there was this guy sitting in the next seat and he's mansplaining the whole game to me, and I just found that very frustrating. So I was really just capturing any and all experiences, and that really shaped what I was able to do at Shes4Sports. And really after that transition period, it's like, you know what, I got to do something about this. And you talked about Steve Jobs and other entrepreneurs and really successful people. I think entrepreneurs, I don't know if it's naivety, but we just have this thing where we're like, we think we can do it, even maybe if we can't, but we're riding off of this thing. It's not that tea that you had, but we're riding off of something that says that we can actually do this. And I guess that's what I did. I just, entrepreneurs definitely have character traits of being risk takers. And 100%. I took a risk. I didn't have a lot of funding or anything like that. And I started on Twitter, and at the time, now it's X, and Facebook. Started with a small community of women I already knew working in sports, in terms of interviewing them and then asking them, like, who else can I speak to? But to encourage anyone out there, I didn't have it all figured out. I just was passionate, and I took a risk.
That's so key. One of the last things you just said, you didn't have it all figured out. I've heard many different leaders like yourself say, if you have 50% of the information, that's enough for you to act on. If you have 70% of the information, that's enough for you to act on. So this kind of false belief that a lot of us have that we need all the data, especially we're in this, what I like to coin, data drunk world where we know the stats and figures on just about anything, it seems these days. We feel like we need to have all those numbers and understand them before we take that step, or sometimes you just have to learn by just doing, if you will.
Yeah, and I will say there were a lot of research reports that I pulled online at the time. I just wanted to know a little bit more about fan engagement and the growth of certain sports. And a lot of the research I was taking in, a lot of it came from the States and Europe. It did actually point to the next fan base would be women, or the opportunity to grow fan bases would be based on women, because women do hold a lot of the purse strings, right?
Right.
In their family unit, if it's countries where women are, remaining to be single, which is fine. They have disposable income. So a lot of the, companies that are doing the research around that, they're looking at it's always follow the money, right?
Right.
Who has the money? Who has the disposable income? And a lot of the research showed that. And a lot of the things that I'm seeing now, so 2016 was the time I was doing the research. A lot of the things I'm seeing now have come true from that research. Yeah.
And there's something you also mentioned in your story, the thought of having to move back home.
Oh God.
to your mom's house.
Please don't bring me back there.
I bring that up because I remember that. So to share my quick story, similar to you, I was kind of living my dream. I was in New York. I was working for a British ad sales firm on Wall Street. I was 25 years old. I'm like, I've made it. Whoever thought this kid who went to high school in Mississauga is now on the big famous Wall Street doing his thing. And then I had to come home for personal reasons. And I went from having a small apartment at that with a roommate, but a view of the Empire State Building to in my mom's basement, sleeping on a couch, going from that to that. And I was just like, WTF, man. Like, well, how did I end up here? I did all the right things. And I just remember, I think I was never clinically diagnosed, but I felt pretty close to being depressed.
Yeah.
Because I put in all this work. I did all the right things. And I still ended up
here. It's trauma, right? Like something completely changed in your life.
100%.
That, it forces your body to go into panic, to questioning things. And it's not what you set forth that it should have been. And I think sometimes it takes a while for our minds to catch up with what's happening.
Yeah.
I can honestly be transparent and say that transition was pretty tough for me because, again, you give up so much. You move everything somewhere. You're building your life in a new community. I was meeting new people. And then, for anybody, 6 months goes by really fast. And then you're like, this is what this experience was going to be like, and then just kind of the moving back, whether you have to sell some of your items that you don't need anymore. Like it is traumatic, however you want to slice it or dice it, it is.
Yeah. And there's something you also said, something about, I could be paraphrasing here, living a life like true to yourself, what do you really want out of this experience? And it made me think about, so there's a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it was written by a nurse, and I think it's palliative care, the people who, take care of those.
Life,
yeah. And I think she's based out of the UK, and she wrote an article in The Guardian, and her book's called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And throughout her course of her job, her career, she would just journal and have their conversations with her patients. And she said the number one regret of the dying was that of not living a life true to themselves. So you think about you're doing this career for your parents or because you thought socially this is what people would respect the most, whatever the reason is, to come to learn that most people, when they're in their final days, are thinking, man, there was this opportunity, there was this thing, there was this girl, there was this guy, whatever it is, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, but I didn't do it. And now they're just lamenting on that fact.
Yeah, and living your true life and you following your purpose.
Yeah,
there's sacrifices too, right?
1000%.
And that's why I was saying, I do meet a lot of people through different things, and some of them will come up to me after and say, I always wanted to start a cookbook company or something, or I wanted to start my own donut shop. And I'm like, their question always is, how did you just start Shes4Sports? I think there's a lot that's holding a lot of people back, but I can't teach anybody how to just jump, right?
Right.
Just like yourself, there's always a lot of the analogies of entrepreneurs. There's a cliff, and are you going to jump, or are you going to kind of look back at the past and kind of go back, or are you going to go forward? It is very scary to jump and start your own thing because you don't know. You don't know, is it going to be successful? Is it going to fail? You don't know how many years of grinding you're going to have to do. And entrepreneurship is not for the faint. It really isn't.
It is not.
I feel like sometimes it's a combat sport.
Right.
Like today, who am I? I got to put the bandana on across my forehead and roll up my sleeves, and everybody says elbows up. But and some days you're like, I can't do this today. Like I need to step back, and I'm not strong today. I need a reset. So it does take you through all the emotions. But I think if you do have that passion, surround yourself around the right people, like let the passion continue to push you forward.
Right.
Because there are days when you're not going to want to do it.
Amen to that. and while we're on the topic of failure or pushing through challenges like that, have your challenges shaped your mindset about failure? Specifically, do you view failure differently now than you did previously or back then when you were going through it?
I do, because I feel like sometimes failure can, for me specifically, it could be very like finite. It's like you failed. There's no coming back from this. But I think it shows you that you can be a little bit more resilient. You can grow in different ways. And you don't have to be the exact carbon copy same person every season of your life. Some failures, some traumatic things, some disappointments will teach you to be a different person, right? And however you want to define that. Because I am not saying that every day I have a Superwoman sign on my chest. I'm not saying that at all. But it does give you a little bit of that Teflon kind of thing that you're like, you know what? I dealt with that crazy thing last week. Whatever's coming next, I know I can just kind of push through it. Even if I'm coming out of it with scars on my knees and, as I said, scars on your face, figuratively, I can push through it.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree with you. I think I said the word confidence, but I really mean that, because once you've dealt with a series of failures or a huge one, it doesn't even have to be a lot. You'd be like, okay, I've done this before. You kind of have a playbook of, okay, emotionally, this is what I need to do to keep my head in the game. Or this is physically, this is what I need to do. Maybe I need to, get a personal trainer or do something, physical fitness or something like that. So I definitely feel it builds confidence. And I sometimes ask, if you could go back, would you do anything differently? I know for myself, I wouldn't, as much as that experience sucked, because I think it's prepared me for any other type of downfalls that can happen. I know like mentally what I would do, versus I think about some people that I work with now, my day to day, where like their first job out of college, out of university, working for a top 10 tech company. I was like, you don't know what struggle is, man.
And they'll learn in different ways. Because sometimes going right to the top, right, you don't have that sort of preparation. You don't have those other skill sets to weather the storm. So, but you'll learn really quickly when the fire comes.
Absolutely. So I want to move on and talk a little bit more about the conversation about women, their representation in sports. So there's a growing conversation around women's representation in sports, but the barriers are still very real. In your opinion, what is the most pervasive challenge women face in the industry right now?
There's a lot. I think what's sparking in the top of my mind right now is accessibility. The women's sports obviously is growing. We've seen a growth over the last 3 years, whether it's viewership, attendance, merch. And I could specifically highlight the WNBA. Their numbers from the 2024 season were history-making numbers.
Skyrocket.
You're talking about millions of people watching their games, attendance, sellouts, and obviously we have that secondary ticket market. People are buying and reselling. So full stadiums and arenas and viewership is great. But sometimes we don't remember that some people can't get to the. They don't have the ability, or maybe there's a financial barrier to actually get to the game, right? So when it comes to viewership, accessibility is so important. Some people don't have the money to get the WNBA League Pass, right? And then maybe there's a game that's on another higher channel of a sports channel. And I'm not calling out TSN because they were able to do a partnership with Unrivaled, which is a new basketball league that started in Miami. and they had it on the TSN Plus app. But, you have to sign up and you have to
Right.
get it. So I think there's a lot of barriers sometimes for, and I won't just say women, men and women, because there's a lot of research out there now that both sexes and however you identify, people are watching women's sports, whether it's soccer, whether it's basketball, whether it's hockey. The numbers and the data show that. But if you make it hard for people to access it, is it, or you're not marketing, where is it on YouTube? Do I have to download an app? So I would say I would love to see more of the broadcasting rights and those deals. And I know the WNBA is working on their next collective bargaining agreement. And I think when you have a league that's been around for a while, I believe the other leagues will start to watch to see how they're brokering their deals and, who, is CBS coming on ABC, which broadcasters are coming on, because I think you do have to make sure it's out there in the public eye. Now, we do know that a lot of people are cutting their cables, right? Cutting the cable strings, however you want to put it. So making sure it's on digital platforms, making sure it's accessible on, if you're on X or Instagram, or how can you connect with these players on digital. So I think that's a big thing. But there's so many things, thinking about the grassroots level. Are we preparing young girls to be able to go through that pathway of playing professional sport? And what does that look like?
Right.
Because the pathway for boys, it just seems really straight, so I'm hearing now the scouts are attending high school games, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe they'll go to a D1 school or get a scholarship, but we don't hear so much about the pathway for women. So it would be good to or girls, I should say, to hear, are we really preparing them? Is the structure and the resources there to get these girls to play at the next level? Because I played volleyball all the way up until high school, and I didn't try out when I got to university. Nobody was telling me to try out. Nobody was rallying around that. The guidance counselors were like, get good grades and don't party too much. But there was no sort of push forward to continue on this pipeline. And at the time, I didn't see any professional women in volleyball making any money, because a lot of the times athletes have to take out second mortgages, second jobs to continue their career, even Olympians, right? But now things are changing. We are seeing women getting paid. Obviously, they're not getting paid the same as men.
Bit of a gap there.
There's a big gap. I believe Caitlin Clark made about $70,000 last year.
Her salary, NBA salary.
And I know like a rookie starting in the NBA is probably making a little over $1 million or $2 million. So there is a lot of inequity when we talk about pay equity, and hoping these collective bargaining agreements can solve that and get closer to that. But I will say that sometimes fans don't understand that when you run a league, it's a business. So think about it, you have a limited amount of dollars and money. Well, you've got to put on this operations, you've got to deal with vendors in the food stands. You got to deal with paying your players, paying your health therapist to, help them condition and not get injured, paying your staff, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a business. So if the WNBA isn't bringing in $1 billion, they can't pay Caitlin Clark $1 billion.
Right.
So sometimes I think there's a little bit of a discrepancy with what fans know about professional sports leagues and how they're run, because there's a lot of debate online where this isn't fair and that's not fair. And we're not saying it isn't unfair. We're just saying it's also a business and they don't have that pool of money to begin with.
Right.
Will it get better? I think with more investors, we're seeing a lot of non-traditional investors investing in sports, whether it's somebody who's an entrepreneur or somebody who just supports women's sports, an actor, an actress. Some of the NBA players have invested in Unrivaled. So I think it's going to take everybody coming together. I don't think it's going to be that traditional Wall Street guy in a business suit investing in teams. I think it's going to be a lot of different people trying to support women's sports.
Yeah. And to your point about the fans not understanding the business, sometimes I feel like their math isn't really mathing. But speaking of kind of like, I don't know if you call them controversial conversations, we've all heard the so-called suggestions of ways that people can improve the WNBA. I don't really think it's necessary now, but I'll ask you because you're the expert here. So every now and then we hear suggestions like lowering the rim or altering some other aspect of the game to increase WNBA viewership, to put more butts in the seats. But with this ongoing conversation about the gender pay gap, which we're just kind of talking about, between the NBA and WNBA, do you think that these kinds of ideas are missing the point, or are some of them worth considering? What's ultimately your take on
I think
that?
they're missing the point. They don't have a problem with attendance.
Mm.
I was just online looking at, because I went to Indiana last year to see
Right.
Caitlin Clark play, but I
Oof.
also picked the game that the Chicago Sky was playing because I wanted to
Ooh.
see Angel Reese.
Good rivalry.
When you're outside of, I think it's called Gainsbridge or Gainesfield, the arena, people are already there way early, chatting and talking and posters and signage, and you can't get a ticket. You know, I will say, I obviously don't know what attendance is like at every team, but most of the teams, people are buying tickets ahead of time. I did check today. I think it was Indiana, and they were saying the last preseason game they played, I believe, on the weekend, the average ticket was $600. You don't normally see that for a WNBA game. And even the new leagues that are the new teams that are popping up, the Golden State Valkyries, they, I think, had membership tickets sold out. You know, like people are just putting their money down, you know, and most of the times it's put $100 down to secure, you know, your membership, and we'll get back to you and let you know when you can get tickets or what packages look like. So people are buying season tickets, and I don't think they have a problem with bums and seats and viewership. I think where people are missing the point is that it's two different products. Like the NBA has been around for probably 75
plus years, yeah.
The WNBA a little over 25 years,
Yeah,
right? So two different products, two different I guess timelines of going to where they need to be or getting to, you know, the product that they are. So I think we should treat them as two separate products.
I agree with that too.
Families, people from diverse communities, people who identify as whatever, come to the WNBA games to support these women. They like the community. So I've been to a couple of WNBA games. One was in Washington, one was in Indiana, and I've also gone to Unrivaled, which is a new basketball league that the players that play in this league are from the WNBA. And it's just a vibe, you know, there's a DJ, there's the community, people have their, you know, I spoke to people that sat beside me and outside in their fan zone, and they said, like, you know, my husband bought me tickets and we're here celebrating my birthday. Another person bought their best friend because the best friend plays basketball and she wanted to see all these WNBA players. It just has a different vibe. I think now when you go to an NBA game, if you're sitting too close to the court, you might get hit. There could be a fight, right? And I'm not saying all the games turn out into fights, but it's just a different type of vibe. And I've also been to NBA games too, but the WNBA is a special league. I will definitely say people just walk out of there with smiles on their faces. And I spoke to a dad when I was in Indiana who was waiting to get in the doors to see the Fever play. And he had his daughter, and he's like, you know, I'm so excited about this. And I just want her to see role models too, right? And maybe she's not playing basketball, but maybe this might interest her into playing basketball. So families, it's just great to chat with a lot of different fans. Driving in from wherever, I mean, I had to get on a plane to go to Indiana, but it was nice. It was just a nice vibe.
Yeah.
But I think two different products.
Yeah, I love that. I was just gonna repeat that. I love when you phrased it as two different products, because obviously it's easy to see why people would compare and stack the WNBA up to the NBA. But to your point, there are two very different products, although similar, although they're playing the same sport. And also, I think the WNBA is on pace. If you think of where the NBA was at 25 years, I would say the WNBA is actually ahead of where the NBA was at that time. And I think actually, I know I might be speaking too soon, but I think the WNBA is actually having their watershed moment before the NBA had it, right? Because in my purview, at least just my humble opinion, you know, Caitlin, why am I forgetting her name? Angel. I feel like that's the WNBA's version of Larry Bird and Magic, so to speak, right? They're coming in, and I think also what women's sports lacked in general was just that narrative that they do so well in men's sports, right? It started off in college, right? Get it? There was a whole lot of stuff going on there, which we won't get into, but that narrative, I think helped people be like, I want to tune in and see this great matchup between these two great, you know, women giants here that are taking over the sport.
But you mentioned something very important, narrative, but then the other piece is visibility. That narrative could have been going on, you know, on the court. But if we did not see that as fans, it doesn't go anywhere.
Absolutely.
And it really ties into why I started Shes4Sports. You know, I've been able to meet women in Canada who are nutritionists, women who work for the Raptors and basketball operations. But if you don't see them and hear their story, you don't know they're there. You don't know that maybe, another person watching, I can, work in that job. Or for a male watching, it's that sort of mindset that, hey, women are working in sport and it's normal. I think, and you made a good point about watching NCAA, like it's always fast paced and competitive. I would also say the WNBA is like that too, and unrivaled. Like these women were not leaving anything on the court. People were diving for things and going after rebounds and different things like that. So the talent and the competition is there, but the visibility piece, if we can't see it, it's almost like it's not happening.
Right. So what do you say to somebody that kind of downplays the whole visibility factor, whether it be in like corporate or in sports? Because sometimes people kind of downplay that. And I think the reason why they do it, if I'm just sharing my quick POV, is because they don't understand what it's like to be a minority in whatever sense, whether that's be from a gender perspective or from a racialized perspective. But what's your kind of thoughts when you hear people kind of like downplay the importance of visibility?
Yeah, I don't even like to talk to those people.
Fair enough.
I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying to me, if women could at least hit, and shove and push each other on the boards, talking for hockey. Yeah. This gentleman I was talking to, he wasn't an older gentleman. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
He's like, it'd be interesting. And I'm like, have you been to a PWHL game, Professional Women's Hockey League? Like they're shoving each other on the boards. We're all in the crowds going, oh, that's going to hurt after. You're going to be in an ice bath after this. The game has changed, the game is not what it was 20, 30 years ago in women's sports. And I'm not saying that it wasn't competitive, but I think the people that are saying lower the rim, why are they not doing this as the men's are doing this? Like the game has changed, it's evolving, but also I think people need to do the work and go and actually see it. Sometimes people are living off of myths and stereotypes and they're not actually getting a ticket or turning the TV on to watch women's sports to see what this product is like now. Right. So I think that is sort of where there's a misconception there. But I find even on our feeds, when I first started Shes4Sports, I would get sometimes people leaving comments like, oh, women should go back into the kitchen and bake bread. Like there was this one play-by-play host who was kind of the first woman that was doing that role in baseball. I can't remember what her name is right off the top of my head. And I remember people were commenting, oh, I don't like her voice. She should go back to baking muffins. And like, I don't feel like and I don't see it. We're not really getting those comments that much anymore. They've kind of trickled away and died off. And I'm hoping with this person that's just, this hypothetical person that you're saying that's saying, why are you guys complaining? Is it the visibility? Is it not? I'm hoping that will just kind of trickle away because it's just a lot of noise. The product is great. We're seeing that now. And as you said, everyone likes data. So when we look at these partnerships and we see the companies coming on board to support women's sport and invest, those companies have the data. If there's no data there, then you can't prove the sort of a business case. You can't prove that this is going to actually make money in the long run. And I'll take a good example is the hockey team I was talking about, the PWHL. It's a league. There are 6 teams across Canada and the States. So in Toronto, we had, they were called the Toronto team, but now they're the Scepters. So they did eventually get a name in the second year of them being around, but they played at the Mattamy. If anyone's familiar with Toronto, it's Ryerson's facility, TMU now. They played there, and that held about 2,000 seats. The second year, the PWHL Toronto team went to the Coca-Cola Coliseum, and that holds about 8,000 seats. You have to prove the business case. You have to prove people are going to come. And sometimes with women's sports, I find we're held at a different standard where we have to prove success right away. That's not business. And then when we come back to talking about leagues as business, there's a lot of steps. There's a lot of process that has to take place before people can feel like, it's successful or it's not. But I find there's a lot of naysayers sometimes in the beginning. There's a lot of people resting on old stereotypes, but it's a new product. And we need the data, and it goes as it goes. It's a league. They've got to hire staff. Running any business, you wouldn't run out and hire 500 people without knowing if you could afford to hire those people and knowing if the operations is sustainable, right? So people just have to think of it as a business. It will get there. It is getting there. And if you turn on the TV or go in a newspaper, there's always a story about something around women's sports.
100%. And what I like and what I've seen change over the last 5-7 years, it's also just the coverage of girls sports. Like I think of more like channels like Overtime, which you'll find more on YouTube, which is where I first learned of Paige Beckers. I knew about Paige when she was a junior, senior in high school, right?
Yeah.
Which is, 20 years ago, rarely would you ever kind of learn about a young female athlete at that point in her career. So I definitely see things on the up and up and changing. But speaking of new, we have some exciting news coming to the city of Toronto. So the addition of the Toronto Tempo seems to reflect a growing interest in the WNBA outside of the U.S. What are your initial thoughts on this new WNBA team coming to Toronto, and what impact do you think it could have on the city and women's basketball as a whole?
It is huge because it's the WNBA's first international team. So, if you think about the Blue Jays and the Raptors, they represent all of Canada.
Right.
The Tempo will represent all of Canada. Yes, they will, they're Toronto Tempo based in Toronto, but they will definitely represent the country. And I think it's huge. Canada has an amazing basketball program. We're seeing a lot of Canadians, men and women, playing in NCAA at that level. I believe there was over 100 Canadians in the last sort of NCAA season of basketball that were playing in the States, men and women.
Yeah.
And we are seeing folks like Kia Nurse, Bridget Carlton playing in the WNBA, and they've come from sort of the Canada program side, and then obviously went to play in the States. So Canada, I feel like, in terms of our whether it's street cred or our what people see of us, we're respected. We're respected globally when it comes to basketball. And there are some people coming from international places who want to play in our system, in our programs. So I think that just adds to that. There's so much talent in this country. On the girls' side, I think this is just going to, inspire them even more to continue playing, whether it's rep ball or, you do get a scholarship, or maybe you just want to play for fun. I think this is going to do a lot to those girls to kind of stick with it, stay in sport, see these role models who are playing in Toronto. And now for me, I won't have to get on a plane all the time to go watch the WNBA. I can just, take the train and go and see them. And I'm really excited about that. I think it means a lot to the country. Economic investments, I think resources for girls, whether, some other businesses are going to come on board and build more basketball courts, because we're seeing that a lot around our city. I think anything with basketball camps. I can't wait to see the other sponsors and investors who are going to come on board. I know Sephora and Maybelline have come on board with the Tempo, but I can't wait to see who else is going to.
I have an idea. I think
invest.
Another sponsor that should come on board is New Balance.
Yeah.
Because one, I just think the logo kind of looks like New Balance a little bit. And number
There's that
two,
visual tie-in already.
Yeah, there's that visual tie-in, and New Balance is just a popular brand, especially amongst women, but for both men and women. So, hey, New Balance, I'm just saying, it could be a good look for you guys.
That was your idea. Yeah, no, I think it's just going to mean so much for a lot of people. What I hear when I'm traveling to watch women's sports, whether I've seen soccer, I've seen hockey and basketball. It's even, as I said, the dads wanting their daughters to see this and see these women and connect with them and connect with sport in that way. So I think it's going to mean a lot to a lot of people, whether you're in basketball, whether you're looking for a role model, whether you want it to be like a family experience or hanging out with your girlfriends or your guy friends. I think this is just going to bring everybody together. And sports always brings people together. We love the
100%.
competition. We love the community. We love the vibe. And Toronto is such a big sports city. It only made sense that we would get a team here.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere, I could be wrong in saying this, but I think Toronto's like the 6th biggest sports city in North America.
Yeah.
So like when you factor in cities like Boston, New York, LA, I think Dallas, and 2 others, I think we're up there, top 10.
And think about the states or the cities that are near us, whether you're Buffalo or Detroit. I'm sure people will come across the border, hopefully,
Absolutely.
to watch the game. But I do believe, from what I'm hearing about the team, I could only imagine that they would have, whether it's preseason games or doing a regular game outside of Toronto. I'm sure they'll probably do something like that, and do it in another province or something like that. That would only make sense because it's Canada's team. So I can't wait to see the rollout of how this is all going to be, how it's all going to play out. But I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, and I think the other opportunity that I think will happen because we're bringing a WNBA team here is for people that are finished their actual sports playing career, but now they're moving into like an executive role.
Yeah,
all
jobs.
You're right, all those jobs and opportunities from an administrative perspective. I'm also excited for those people who've, paid their dues, have their flowers, but want to extend their career, not as an athlete, but now as a person behind the scenes kind of orchestrating things.
And I teach at Seneca College. I teach sports marketing and journalism. And I've told my students, like, sign up to their newsletters, make sure you know what's going on, because they're also looking for interns, right? So it could be for some people the beginning of their career, and others, as you said, who are a little bit more seasoned.
Absolutely.
Might be some more opportunities.
Absolutely. So fun fact, I was an intern at Fuse Television, which was owned by Madison Square Garden. So I went through the same Porto channel if I was going to work for the Knicks, or intern for the Knicks, I should say. So Ainka, so my last major question for you is, if you could only give one piece of advice to young Black girls, or just women in general, who dream of making basketball their career, what would it be?
I would say if you're playing and you still want to move forward, Canada has a great basketball program. Whether you find a rep league to play with, or a Kia Nurse has her Kia Nurse Elite camps. Aaliyah Edwards, who plays for the Washington Mystics, she's Canadian from Kingston, Ontario. Shout out to anybody from Kingston, Ontario. She has a basketball camp as well, too. I would say connect yourself with those resources. But if you just want to play for fun and recreational in school, join a team. Sometimes we don't sign up for things. We'll see a list, we'll see the call out, but we're just we stand back. But, sign up. Sports teaches you so much, teaches you how to work with a team, teaches you failure. It teaches you how to get better. And, physical activity is also really good. So I would say that point for anybody on the playing athletic side. But if you maybe are an athlete who feels like, I don't think my path is leading me down to becoming professional or sticking with it as a player, I would say just, go on LinkedIn, sign up for newsletters for different leagues, and look to see if they're hiring. They're always looking for different types of staff. Maybe you have more of a character traits or skills in marketing. Maybe you're somebody who likes data analytics. There's so much out there. Yeah. I just don't think we always know all the jobs that are out there. And because I've been in it for like 9 years on the sports side of running my own media company, I get sent things. So I do my best to like repost on LinkedIn, or if friends who were working at leagues say, hey, we're hiring for this, can you just post it? I do my best, but I'm always amazed at like a lot of people don't know what's going on. They don't know that these jobs are there. So I do my best to post stuff, but get involved. And even if you see a job that maybe you think I don't have 100% of the qualifications, but maybe I have 75, apply for it. Maybe they're looking for someone to upskill and train, right? And maybe you have a great personality and you know a lot about the sport and you'd fit in great. Don't worry if you don't have everything.
Absolutely.
Lots of people apply for things
that they don't qualify.
Yes.
And you never know.
Shoot your shot.
Never know. So we're actually getting through the 3 questions part as we wrap up. So give the context for the listeners and for you. So while I isolated myself in the jungle in Costa Rica when I turned 40 this past summer, I came across a thought. And that thought was, no one is going to talk you into or out of more things than yourself. Because I am an overthinker. So I decided to come up with a card game for overthinkers like myself. Because I figured, Ainka, that one of the best skills you can learn as a human being is learning how to have constructive and productive conversations with yourself, because who's talking to you more than you, right? So with that being said, I would like you to pick 2 cards from the deck.
Wow.
And you're going to answer the questions here.
I'll go right in the middle.
Yeah.
And then I'll go right at the end.
There you go.
Okay.
And then do your best to answer the questions.
Oh, okay. This one's kind of a nerdy one, but name one thing you used to be afraid of or uncomfortable with, but now do comfortably or well. filing my corporate taxes
Amen
for my
to
business.
that. Oof, don't get me started with
If
taxes.
anyone knows about running a business, I have to file my personal taxes. That's one. And then I have to file my corporate taxes. And I used to be terrified. It's like, do I have everything, my receipts, do I have everything written down? You know, did I document everything well? And you're just petrified because you don't want anything to, you know, stop the flow of what's going on with your business, and you don't want to get in trouble with the government. So I used to be terrified by doing that. Every time it was coming up, you got that pit in your stomach. You're like, oh my gosh. But now I think I'm okay with it. Again, you know, it's another kind of Teflon thing that I'm like, you could do this. This is going to be fine. So yeah, I would say that. And it's a bit of a more of a nerdy response, but that's the first thing that came up to my mind.
I love it. I love it. Excellent.
What habit do you have that works against you the most? I would say I tend to like to take on a lot. And when you're running a business, you can't always do that. I would say for anyone who's in this situation or just starting their startup or small business, focus on the things that are aligned to the purpose of what you're doing and focus on what you actually have capacity to do. So don't take on 10 things when you know your capacity can only handle 5. And it's hard because if you're an overachiever, overthinker, you're like, I got this, I can do it all. But then it's not good because then your tank is empty the next day and you can't do what you need to do for those other things. So prioritize what's important because really not everything is important.
That's currently me right now.
Yeah.
So that's what I struggle
I'm working on that.
That's what I struggle with. And there's one I'm going to ask. I ask everyone this for my last question is, what is a mantra or a quote that you currently live by?
I like the one, and I'd hope I don't butcher it, is if you want to go slow, if you want to go slow, go alone. If you want to go fast, go bring everyone together. Is that how it is?
Yeah, I think
something like that.
Something I know which one you're saying. I think it's if you want to go
far,
fast,
or is it far?
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a team or something like that.
And please don't come for me, listeners, if I butchered that, but I do like that one.
Amazing. So, Ainka, for all the people that want to connect with you, perhaps even collaborate with you or support what you're doing, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Email. So Shes4Sports at gmail.com. Shes4Sports at gmail.com. You can also check out our platforms. If you just type in Shes4Sports, it will pop up. And remember, it's the numeral 4. So SHES, the numeral 4, and then sports. And if you Google that, you'll find us. And essentially, for those on the business side that want to collaborate with us or partner, we produce a lot of digital video content. We produce event experiences, social media marketing plans. We can generally help everybody if we just kind of know what they need help with. But, we've also got a really deep network of women in sports. So sometimes we work with people who don't have that and need to tap into that community.
And you just had an event not too long ago, too.
I did. It was something very different. It was talking about the intersection of sports and fashion. We all see the fits. We see athletes, controlling their brand with how they dress and the brands that they actually partner with. Fashion has become huge in professional sports, every sport. And beauty has also entered the chat. A lot of beauty brands are working with athletes as well. So, we had a discussion about that. We had a business owner who runs an apparel company called The Peace Collective. She's a co-founder. We had a fashion stylist who styled Gary Trent Jr., who was previously with the Raptors. We had an Olympian who talked about her brand as an athlete and what fashion, how she approached that. So it was a great, healthy discussion, but we had a lot of fun. And we had a mini fashion show after the panel talk. So we've never done that before. And that was something new for us. And we tend to like to try new things at Shes4Sports. Keep it fresh.
I love it. I love it. Well, guys, that concludes this episode of 3 Questions with Corey Kareem. And as many of you know, I like to end each episode with saying this. Sometimes you don't need to learn anything new. Sometimes you just need to see or hear that somebody else went through it too. So with that being said, myself and Ainka are out. Peace and love. Until the next time.
Clockwise, 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 clockwise. Never turn back. Only go clockwise.